Greetings, everyone. This is Payman Lorenzo, host of the Leaders What podcast. Today, I have another repeat, a great friend of mine to get to know over the last maybe 2-3 months through
Like
the
that.
coaching program that we both attend with our awesome coach, the Sales Ninja Lee. And we had some beautiful conversation. We just spent the last almost half an hour talking about something beautiful. And we did the first episode with you about 2 months ago, and that was about your background. And today we'll talk about something even better, something not better, but something that is, we're gonna go deeper inside your business and also what you're doing. So a little bit about you, Phil Routley, originally from Ontario, Canada, now in beautiful British Columbia on the West Coast. And you've been a pastor and a minister. Is it called minister?
Yep. You can call it that.
Yeah, for the last 3 centuries or so.
Not quite. Not quite. This is actually 43 years ago that my wife and I were both ordained as pastors.
Beautiful. And today we're going to talk about that and some of the incredible things you're doing. Especially you mentioned something that caught my attention right away, and that is that you also, what is it? You minister in the prison system in your area.
Yeah, I'm the executive director of a prison ministry organization that we work in 10 different institutions throughout British Columbia.
Beautiful. So we're going to dive deeper into all of that. But first of all, thank you again for being back on my show. It's always a pleasure having you, Phil. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation to return.
Pleasure's all mine. So for people who don't remember, who don't know you, tell us briefly. We're going to talk about all of that in a moment. But as a person, as a man, as a human being, who's Phil?
I've been a husband for over 52 years. My wife and I have 3 kids. We have a total of 11 grandchildren. We have 1 daughter-in-law now because we started with twin grandsons, and the oldest one, one of those twins, got married last summer. That part of the family is all in Atlanta, Georgia. They have 6 boys, 2 of them adopted from Ethiopia. And then we have a son and his wife who are in Portland. And we have a daughter who has 3 adopted girls who lives in Burnaby, just an hour away from us here in British Columbia. My first career was a school teacher. A friend and I started a music teaching studio, which then we were the rock and roll music store of Kingston, Ontario. Guitars, drums, amps, everything that goes with that. We were both in our early 20s, really, and greatly undercapitalized, but man, did we ever learn a lot. So all of the kinds of skills that I got along the way there when we went into ministry, brought them with us. Eventually got a master's degree focusing on strategic planning, and that is still what I do more than anything else. As a coach, it's sitting down with people and basically saying, where are you now? Where do you want to be? How are you going to get there? And I think of it as the GPS method. The GPS is totally useless unless it knows where you are.
Indeed. Powerful.
Right? So yeah, and applying that these days also in coming into being the executive director of M2W2 Association and charting a course for where it is that God wants us to be, who we want to be working with, in what way, and how do we then bring on board, one of the most challenging things, younger volunteers and donors. Like most nonprofits, the vast majority of people who are involved are getting on in years. You're into your 60s and 70s in many cases, but part of that's because you don't have a young family to be concerned about at home. So all those kinds of things that we're exploring. What's a strategy in order to connect with people along those lines?
Beautiful. Wow. Powerful. Well, listening to you again, to your brief overview of your path, first question that comes to mind is, how does someone transition from the world of music, which I can imagine back in your 20s must have been pretty fun, pretty wild maybe, to to the faith and to serving God. How did that happen? Was there a
Well,
specific event that triggered that, or did you grow up in a family where faith was a major part of your life already? Talk us through.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
No question about that. From my earliest memories have to do with our involvement in our local church. My mom and dad were also always very involved, teaching and leading, and a very musical family, that it was kind of natural that this would come along. But this was in the Salvation Army back in the day. And I mean, Salvation Army is known worldwide for brass bands. So my first exposure was learning how to play a brass instrument in a Salvation Army band. England is huge still with brass bands. There are major competitions there every year. And it kind of grew from that because the Salvation Army's earliest days were in the East End of London and then throughout England and throughout the rest of the world. So my love for music was there, but I also recognized that growing up in Peterborough, Ontario, nobody was listening to brass band music on the radio. And, you know, we get into the mid 60s, we got the influence of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and my favorite band at that time, the Dave Clark Five. And then you got the Beach Boys and, you know, all of this kind of thing. And that was where I believed at that time that the church needed to be making use of more modern instruments. So you get the guitars, the drums. And I played drums, and a friend and I started a Christian rock band in our church. And we were enjoying that so much that one night we sat down and said, "What would you like to do?" And we both said, "Start a music store." So that was how that all got started. But it was using contemporary music and making use of it in the church. I don't know how much you know about the background of the Salvation Army, but the first decades, many decades, they created the vast majority of their own music. The
Wow.
music that they used were the bar tunes that people would hear on a Saturday night,
Really?
and they put Christian words to them.
Give
So
us an
they were
example.
using
Give us an
in
example.
18, I can't think of one off the top of my head, 1860s, 1870s, when it was getting started, they were using contemporary music and contemporary instruments at that time. So in
Give
the
an example.
1960s, 1970s, that's what we were doing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wow. And then talk us more about your involvement with the church, and you being first. You said, talk us through your journey. And
Yep. Yeah. Being involved in our church, it was a church of 300 or 400 people.
mm,
So we had a pretty active youth group, people in their teens. And when I was 15, I was very much involved in this. When I was 17, I became the president of our youth group. And that was what really got me introduced to Christian leadership. And now, whatever that is, 55 years later, that's a huge part of who I am. Um, Within the Christian context, realizing how much God loves us and his invitation to love him back.
mm,
So much that I learned from scripture about how to understand scripture. My earliest memories of my dad, or at least some of the most powerful, was of looking into my mom and dad's bedroom, and they had a card table sitting there, and my dad would be sitting at that card table with Bibles and commentaries and other books sitting on it, and I would just see him studying God's word. And that really gave me an appetite, not just to read it, but to understand it. And in my mind, the best way to understand anything is to learn it so well you can teach it.
absolutely.
So that was a huge, huge part. But part of God's call on my life to go into full-time ministry was simply there's this tremendous need. And so 1978, I felt a very distinct call from God to commit myself and by extension, my wife, because within the Salvation Army at that time, both of us had to be ordained. So we went to college, we studied, and we became pastors of our first church in Toronto, Ontario. And we served there for 6 years and absolutely loved it. We then moved a few miles down the road to Hamilton, and then a few more miles to London, Ontario. And finally, they got it right, and they moved us all the way west to Langley, British Columbia, just outside of Vancouver. And 3/4 of an hour from where we live now is where we've ended up settling. But
Wow.
I've always enjoyed worshiping God, serving God, learning what He has to say to us through His Word, asking questions. That's just a huge part of who I am, is to be asking questions and seeking answers. I think if there's one thing that the world misses and is short of right now, it's leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in the church, but it's everywhere else, no matter whether you're talking about politics or business or entertainment. Real, serious, down-to-earth leadership, which is Patrick Lencioni a couple of years ago. I heard him speaking and saying his hope and prayer was that in the future, there would be no such thing as servant leadership, because simply using the word leadership implied servant.
Love that.
You don't have to describe it that way, because that's how everybody sees it. Even when you look at an organization chart, the servant leader is at the bottom of the chart, not the top. So you kind of flip that whole baby over.
That is so true. And my life changed the moment that I started switching everything I did in life from me, money, to how can I help you? Now, the first question I ask people that I meet is, how can I serve you? How can I help you shine brighter than you're currently shining? The moment I put serving, helping others as a center and foundation of my business, that's when I started to, things really start to move in the right direction. And since I focused on helping, I didn't even have anymore to chase money. Money was a byproduct. Money comes to you automatically, manifests to you, because again, it's all about the heart. It's all about trust. When you talk and when you approach people in a way to really help, serve, and help them win, then you're gonna get all the things that you need. Just like Zig Ziglar said, help other people get what they want, then you will get what you want.
Absolutely.
So what you're
very
saying
true.
is basically what I've been doing, but without this type of, now that it makes it so much more clear for me, because this is how business or anything in life is supposed to be: serving, helping, and dealing with a heart to heart basis.
Yeah. And the most important aspect of all of that is the relationships that you build.
Oh, absolutely.
When I read Genesis chapter 1, God created the world and everything in it, and He looked at each way along the way. It was good. Then it gets to the creation of man, and there's this conversation within the Godhead where they say, "Let us make man in our image." Now, we are not in the image of God in terms of physicality, looks, strength. We are so minuscule. But the one thing that we have within us is this absolute need for relationship. The Trinity Godhead is relationship. And we all know what happens when we have a relationship go south, or when we never have one. And we were talking about the prison ministry side of things. The incredible need is that prisons and people who get out of prison are so lonely. There's nobody on the inside that they feel they can trust for good reasons. I mean, you're surrounded by other inmates. But if you can give them a sense that somebody cares about them. I figured when I was a chaplain in medium security, I'm somewhat in a maximum security as well. My job was simply to love them and to make sure that they knew that somebody cared. So now, as I'm leading this prison ministry, M2W2, it's all about the relationships that volunteers can have with people, whether they're on the inside or they're on the outside. You know as well as I do, when you have a good relationship with somebody, you don't want to let them down.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want anything to break that relationship. Unfortunately, so many have never experienced that. You can go right back to their birth families, if they even knew both parents. Almost always there's something incredibly dysfunctional. They need to know love. And
Beautiful.
when they start to experience some love, they're going to ask you, why do you love me? I am the least lovable person in the world. Don't you know what I have done?
That was
Yeah,
my
I
question.
know what you've done.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
my question. How do you convey love, and I mean unconditional love, to someone who doesn't believe in love, someone that feels the world is against them, that feels down, especially when you end up in a prison system, even though you may have committed a crime because that's where you ended up, all the things that led up to
Mhm.
you making that decision that changed your life, and then when you're in a place where everybody's trying to get at you, dominate you, or even some beat you, even some kill you, how do you make that
Mhm.
person to trust and believe in love again?
Well, let
Doing
me
good.
flip it. Let me
Yeah.
flip it and ask you,
Mm.
how do you know when somebody loves you?
By how they treat me, the reaction. But sometimes,
Mhm.
especially in today's world, unfortunately, you have to be careful. If someone is nice to you, you have to ask yourself if there's a purpose, the agenda they have, or if they're truly genuine, you know?
Yeah.
And I can imagine that to be even more amplified in the prison system because with all the dynamics, all the different currents going on and people trying and all that. But for me, I just look them in the eyes and look at their heart, their action, and see if what they're saying aligns with what they're doing.
I just like to narrow that down a little bit.
Yeah, please.
The number one thing that tells me that somebody loves me is the fact that they will listen.
Love that.
Right? It's so easy when you are hearing what somebody else is saying, you're spending most of the time formulating your answer,
Mm,
right? If they will ever shut up, I know what I'm going to say to them, kind of thing. But when somebody distinctively shuts up and listens, they're paying attention to you. There's nothing in life more valuable than that.
oh, yes, absolutely. Because what people want is to someone, they want to be feel heard and seen. And if you can do that to others,
Yeah,
that's when things magic happen.
for sure. Yeah. And if you were in my mind, if you want to convey to somebody in a prison system, maybe recently released, their family wants nothing to do with them. They've been in for a long time. They have none of the life skills needed in order to survive in our world today. If they know that you listen to them. It means the world. And
Yeah.
so many cases, they're willing to do whatever needs to be done to pass on that love to others.
Mhm.
Just my 2 cents.
These are the most valuable two things I've ever heard in my life. So thank you.
Mm.
That's
Oh, you're most
powerful.
welcome.
Sometimes it's the simple things that we need to hear again, again and again and again until it finally clicks.
Yeah. John Maxwell wrote a book a number of years ago called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect.
Oh, let me write this down. This is beautiful.
I
Wait.
mean,
Yeah.
it's that connection that makes a difference.
Yeah.
We love watching competition shows on TV like American Idol, The Voice, and we were watching American Idol the other day, and the singers that are through the roof fantastic are the ones that are connecting with the audience.
Mm.
Right. And I mean, it's palpable when you get judges listening and crying, and they put the camera across the audience and you see tears as people are connecting with what's being sung. That's so much higher than just communicating. So when we listen, and when a singer is up there pouring their heart out and they are connecting with the audience, and the audience is just the word that comes to mind is enthralled with
Mm.
what's going on. Nothing quite like it.
Powerful. Wow. That's beautiful indeed. So how different is it being a chaplain or a minister, so-called in the real world and then in the prison system?
You are the best connector between inside and outside, because you do get to go home every night,
Mm.
right? The end of the day, what, 4 o'clock, 4:30, whatever the time is, you get to go home and connect with the rest of the world. Excuse me. Their connection with the rest of the world is usually on like a 22-inch TV screen that they had to save up for months in order to be able to buy. And that's it. Now, try to imagine if your only connection with the real world was over a TV screen. They're not allowed internet. They're not allowed cell phones, certainly in our system
Wow.
here anyway. So there's no connection there. If you want to make a phone call to somebody, it has to be pre-approved by the administration, right? So they do all kinds of, this isn't one of your old, drug dealing buddies. You're not going to phone them because it's got to be approved. And so you can call your lawyer, somebody in your family, if they will allow you to. And in many cases, that relationship is so long gone. You kind of bring the real world and a real loving world into an incredibly hostile and hard environment.
Mm.
But one of our staff members has just changed her assignment over the last couple of months. She's always been coordinating volunteers and visiting people in the institutions, generally in groups. But now we have an assignment for her where she's actually in the institution 8 hours a day, 4 days a week. And she is really battling the oppression that she feels from being there. It's tough when you're behind solid concrete walls with people.
Mm-hmm.
It can take a lot out of you. So
Sure.
you do your best to build relationships on the inside, but also have rock solid relationships on the outside, or you go dry.
You mentioned something that really caught my attention. You said that they have to save up for months just to buy a TV. So when someone ends up in prison, are they able to get access to their fund, to their money, or is they have to earn that by doing work inside the prison?
Yeah, at the institution where I was,
Mm,
almost everybody had a job
inside the prison.
but
Okay, I see.
inside the prison. Yeah, I mean, it might be dishwashing, it might be the clerk in the chaplain, for example, or the janitor in the chaplain. But they would be earning something like $4 a week.
And in terms of jobs, is that something that they select what kind of job they can get? Are they based on their skills? Is it something, whatever
They
is the,
they
they get it?
they, they apply. When something comes open, they will apply, and we'll have to get somebody from their cell block to approve it. Typically, anybody who's working with them, and ultimately the warden gets veto power, but you interview, you have conversations, and you come to the conclusion who is going to be the right one for here, which means you can also be making enemies of anybody else who's applied.
Sure.
But generally speaking, and almost always, the chaplains are tremendously respected by everybody who's in there. The chapel is respected. There's every religion and faith practice will make use of it, but there's tremendous respect for it. There was one day the maximum security that I was in. The other chaplain was in the chapel. They were having a chapel service, and two of the guys jumped somebody else and had a shiv and stabbed them in the chapel, and they were hated throughout the rest of the institution.
Wow.
Being maximum security, they were out of their cells 1 hour a day. So there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for people to get even, but there was still some real desire to do that on many people. So they would not be coming back into group situations for a good long time.
Wow. Couple of quick questions. So you said they're making like $4 a week. Are
Yeah.
people inside the prison, the inmates, taxed on their earnings? Or no?
Well, they don't earn the minimum
Oh, okay.
taxable.
Okay, okay. Second question that comes to mind is you mentioned that chaplains are allowed inside the prison, but they also bring in representative of other faiths, like say from
Yeah.
Islam or Judaism or whatever, to come and preach for the inmate.
Yeah. Yeah, most of what's involved is they're coming in to visit with people, to have pastoral visitation and just good conversations, but they will usually have a group gathering as well. And according to whatever their faith is and how they would typically do that, that's what they do. So the Islamic group and the Buddhist group and the Hindu group and the Wiccan group and the Roman Catholics and so on and so forth, everybody would have their opportunities.
Wow. Okay.
It's a fascinating world.
I know.
Great to visit. I don't want you to go stay there.
Oh no, absolutely not. I had one gentleman also that I had on my podcast. He was also in two of my books. He mentioned that he also went inside the prison system in California, and what he does is a speech coach. He prepares people to get ready to do a TEDx talk. So he goes inside the prison system, helps, teaches these inmates life skills, presentation skills, and eventually to share their stories. And he said one of the most amazing, inspiring contracts he had was going to the prison system once a week and coaching these men. And he said
Yeah.
these men were pouring out their hearts, and everybody was pretty much crying, but of just like you mentioned earlier, of being for the first time in their life being seen and heard.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge part of it. Do you know Corey and Tuan, that that Jay has worked with.
Korean Tuan. Sounds
Corey
familiar.
Davis and Tuan Nguyen, if I can say that properly.
Okay.
They were at the John Maxwell International Mentorship the same year as I was there. And Tuan told his story from the stage. And in
Mm.
a nutshell, his story is he was a drug dealer,
Oh, wow.
spent years in prison, became a Christ follower when he was in prison, and discovered the John Maxwell leadership books. Started teaching leadership to the other inmates in that prison. And that was the beginning of his ministry of working with guys on the inside. So when he was released, he had to get special permission, as I understand the story, to leave his home state to go to Orlando, Florida, to be part of the International Maxwell Convention. And he's built his business from there of working with people, helping them to build their businesses, the same way we've heard it many, many times. First, you figure out who your ideal client is, and then you figure out what are their needs, right?
Wow.
And based on that whole same idea. But Tuan's had a huge impact. He's in Houston. He still visits in the prisons, and a large part of it is just teaching leadership from the Maxwell perspective, which is it's all rooted in the teachings of Scripture. Tremendous need. Thankfully, people
Yes.
out there doing it.
Fascinating. So the people that are invited to teach, to coach, and inspire these men, or maybe even women inside the prison system, how are they received by the inmates? And is
They
it,
are loved.
but how long does
Quite
it?
simply, they're loved.
Mm.
When on a Tuesday night, there is a group from M2W2, the group that I work with, and they're going into a prison, and they're going into the visitation center. So there might be 30 people coming in to spend the evening, and 30 of the inmates come, and they'll have coffee together, and they'll just enjoy conversation, one-on-one. Most of the time, the people who have been there before, they've made friends with the volunteers. They make friends with more than just one or two of the guys. And now we've got a brand new volunteer. They will get introduced. And the overall feeling from the guys who are inside is this person's got to be pretty special to give up a Tuesday evening to come and spend a few hours with me.
And it much rather they'd much rather spend the evening doing something productive, or even something that allow them to have any kind of positive human interaction than being alone in their cell. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when a new volunteer, or when we have one of our volunteers who invites somebody, try it. I love it. I've been doing it for 5 years, and I absolutely love it. If you try it once, you'll want to do it all the time.
Speaking of
And that's
that,
exactly what happens.
how would, for example, I am very intrigued. I love helping. When I go back home in Toronto this summer, I would love to volunteer to a prison. What's the steps? How do I start? And other people listening to this, how do we start to give back, to inspire these men, to give them hope again, and just to help a human being?
I wish I could say, here's the person you need to contact, but I don't know in Toronto. If you want to come to Fraser Valley, I can get you really busy and enjoying this tremendously.
All right, noted.
Toronto, I don't know, but the oppressive heat and humidity of Southern Ontario in the summer?
Mm-hmm.
Come to BC.
I don't mind the heat because here is pretty much year long warm. I'd rather take the heat than the cold. But I've never
Not
been to
cold here.
BC. I've never been to BC, but I'm really intrigued. And when I do make it, that would be one of the best ways of that I can further up other people. Absolutely. We'll connect
Yeah,
after. She can share me all of that after.
love to.
Do you think Jay would know how to go about that?
I don't know if he'd know Toronto, but he has other connections throughout the States. I was at a convention in, where was it? San Antonio last
Mm.
November. And it was a Christian leaders and theology conference that was going on. But one of the speakers was a fellow who was in his late 60s who had spent over 30 years in a federal prison. And then they figured out that he actually was not guilty.
Oh God.
And so he was telling his story. And a lot of it, though, quite simply came down to the fact that he had built a relationship with Jesus Christ, or he couldn't have survived it. When he got out, he's now sharing that story. He's studying, getting his master's degree in pastoral
Wow.
studies so that he can multiply what he's been able to do. But it's just one of these talks where you sit there and just say, wow,
What a story.
wow.
Would you
Yeah,
do you know this person? I would be honored to have him on my podcast share his story.
I don't. I've got to go back through some notes even to figure out what his name is.
But if you do, I would be beyond honored.
Yes, I get that. Yeah, I might get
Wow.
him first. We'll see.
Oh, please, please. Yes, yes, of course. You get first dips, of course.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
No, but I'm really curious. I can see this as being something that would incredibly be fulfilling.
yeah, yeah. It really is.
Wow.
Really is.
I am intrigued. I will want to do that. So I will reach out to Jay, or maybe even tonight or tomorrow morning for you, and then the call with Jay. I will mention that to see if he or he,
Hmm.
because he's a gift of connecting other pastors, and
Yeah,
it's quite a few of the group, eh?
and
And
he's in Toronto.
yes, yes, yes. Wow,
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
So great segue. Wow. Tell us more about your
Mm.
business.
Um, my business as a Christian strategy coach
Mm,
is largely to help people go from where they are to where they want to be.
mm.
I think of a GPS. GPS is totally useless if it doesn't know where it is. When it knows where it is, then it figures out where it wants to go. Then it can figure out what's the route from here to there. I have a lot of conversations with people who have had some success in their business, but they're not right now. I mean, entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. It's all there is to it. It's got its ups and downs. But when you've been up to some extent, and kind of when you've crested the hill, and maybe now you're kind of really comfortable, or you've started to make your way down the other side, um, there can be a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of disappointment, a lot of fear of disappointing your family, your friends, your banker,
Or even yourself.
your customers, your clients, your employees, and how do you turn that around?
Mm,
And these are the kinds of conversations I have with people more than anything else. It's about what has been happening. What is your current situation? And let's get all the clarity in the world on that. How
mm,
did you get into this business in the first place? What was it that you really loved about it? How can we get that love back?
mm.
What would it look like in the ideal world? What would this look like 5 years from now? So if it's going to look like that 5 years from now, what does it need to look like a year from now?
Mm.
And just asking tons and tons of questions and aiming for clarity and better understanding until that person is saying, okay, I'm willing to take a baby step and I'm going to do this differently. There's a cartoon I saw years and years ago of a guy just walking around in circles, so much so that the path was worn into the dirt. And the caption says, if I always do what I've always done, I'll always get what I've always got.
Indeed. Yeah.
So how do you change that? Well, that's a huge part of what my role is to help people realize that they're still going around in circles. And if you're going to do something new, it's a good idea to have somebody to do it with.
Mm, absolutely. Wow. Beautiful. Who is your ideal client?
A Christian entrepreneur who is frustrated.
Do you deal mostly with men, women, or both?
Mostly men, but some women I have conversations with as well. Yeah.
And when you say that they're frustrated, frustrated in what way? And about what?
They are not seeing their vision fulfilled.
Mm,
They've run against some kind of a roadblock, perhaps, or there are skills that they realize that they need that they don't have.
mm,
And because they're so busy running their business that they don't have time to actually learn what it is that they need to learn. They may not have enough funds now because the profits have started to drop off. They really need to hire somebody who is an expert in fill in the blank, and they can't do it. So they just seem to be coming up against brick walls everywhere that they go. So let's figure that out. What's your real goal? What's the most important thing to you? What would that look like if we can get over this hurdle? I mean, there's no such thing as entrepreneurship that is not a roller coaster,
mm.
right? Because unless you're Elon Musk, you have complications all over the place. There's not a lot of Elon Musks in the world with his
No.
creativity and his cash.
Yeah.
So for the rest of us,
Yeah.
we have a tendency, I know I have a tendency to bite off more than I can chew, to try and do too much, and to focus on the things that I love more so than the things that I really need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you get bring in the whole accountability side of things.
And also one thing that is tremendously powerful that changed my life, and that is asking the right question. I remember because I wrote down those two questions that you asked me that really made me think, and those questions were, uh, what is it? How would you rate your leadership on a scale of 1 to 10? And
Mm-hmm.
why would you give yourself that number? What would you need to get, say, from a 6, 7, 8, whatever you are, to a 9,
Right.
a couple of notches higher? Those are powerful questions. I wrote them down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's all part of it.
Mhm.
One of the things that John Maxwell talks about all the time, and so do I, is everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah. And,
You don't have a cash problem. You have a leadership problem.
mm,
You don't have an employee problem. You have a leadership problem. So how can we raise your level of leadership in order to solve the rest of the problems?
mm, makes sense. Makes sense. Powerful.
Mm.
Share with us an example of the most remarkable transformation you've seen from either, actually, give us two, one from your business and one from the prison system.
Mm. From the business, it was working with the church
Mm,
in order to help them walk through this strategic process. And we did DISC personality analysis with everybody who was on this board. There are, I think, either 9 or 10 people. And so we did DISC. Are you familiar with DISC?
no.
Okay, it looks at the idea that there's to make it really simple, there's four kinds of people in the world. There's the high D, which is a directive person. This is the full-on entrepreneur, always coming up with a great new idea. The I is an influencer, maybe as driven, but not on task as he is on the relationships with people. They get things done by working through people and through those relationships. The S is the people who like everything steady. They don't like change. Their natural gravitational pull is to keep things the way they are. The C is one who's very interested in complying. So you may end up with accountants who are high Cs. So 2 of these are people oriented, 2 of them are task oriented. The fact is that, if I can remember the number, it's something like 67 or 68% of all people are high S's. They love steady. They don't like change. And they will pull back against it whenever it's presented. They're the ones who will say, well, that's not a good idea. Why? It's just not a good idea. And because they don't like change. The D loves change. And in fact, his heart is in making change take place. And once he has made change there, he's got to move on to the next thing to change.
Wow.
The best little story about how you describe these is if a D, an I, an S, and a C go on a car trip, or they're planning one, the D says, I'll drive. The I says, well, as long as we have fun. The S says, we need to make sure that we get there safely. And the C says, I got my GPS, we're ready to go. In many ways, we need all 4, right? That's what teamwork is all about. That's what relationships is all about. But whichever of those 4 quadrants you are in, it is so easy to criticize and fail to communicate with the other 3 because they think differently than you do. Now, the fact is there are very few pure any of those. We're all combinations of them, right? More or less of different ones along the way. But a lot of the work I did with this group was helping them to understand where they were and why they were able to communicate about so many things in great ways. But in this group, there were no high Ds. There was no visionary. There was no one pushing the envelope. We need to try something new and different here. There was only one high C who was compliant, which is he's the policy guy, wants to make sure that absolutely everything gets done together. Everybody else was a combination of I and S. They were concerned about relationships, about keeping everything the same. And, you know, we got a good thing going, so why mess with it? And there was nobody pulling them or pushing them. Let's try something different. So a large part of what I was doing with them was helping them to see, here is your tendency. Somebody needs to pull you out of the envelope. So we did some group work to determine, what do you have to do to get out of this envelope? Let's come up with brainstorming ideas. How do we understand this? And it was the beginning of something that's now become a rather important part of their church and their leadership team to know more of where they're going and why they're going there.
Powerful. What about an example from the prison system?
Guys that you got to spend considerable amount of time with who have become success stories. Guys that you know everything there is to know about them. You know what their issue was, what led to their arrest, what it was. And now you see them and you spend time with them on the outside, and they have become really responsible people who don't just try to look out for themselves, but have a real team attitude and a real desire to live a successful life now. They got a fresh chance.
Mm.
I mean, this guy I know really well, he spent 22 years in prison. Not going to get into why. Some of those get pretty gruesome.
Sure.
But he's been out now for a year and a half, and he's got a great job. He got his driver's license back. He hadn't driven as long as he was inside. It actually took 3 tries, but he's a very good driver. Just kind of panics a little bit when somebody is watching him with a clipboard, right?
Sure, of course.
But doing great, doing great. And that is so rewarding. And you see these guys who are growing in their faith and they know the difference that the Lord is making in their lives, and they absolutely want to give back. So they are then starting to influence other guys who are on their way out and into the real world.
Beautiful.
That's really fulfilling to see it happen.
Oh, absolutely. Probably the ultimate form of fulfillment to see someone like that who's made the wrong choice and now they understand they not only making the changes for themselves but also sharing their gifts with others, so others don't
Yeah.
make the same mistakes. So that's the ultimate sacrifice and ultimate gift.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's exciting stuff.
Absolutely. What's next for you? What's the next chapter?
I'm going to bed soon. I'm going to be working with M2W2 for several months, maybe a year. We'll see. On the business side of things, I've been rebranding what I've been doing just as Phil Routley, strategy coach. Got a new website that's going to be going online very soon. I already owned philroutley.com, so it's very easy to get that there. Simplifying it all. When I was working, typical entrepreneur, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, all that I was working on was the coaching business and everything related to it. Now I don't have that much time to do it. So I need to focus on 1 or 2 primary things. Thanks to you, podcast is going to be one of those, because I think everything else can get built on that. And I certainly appreciate your leadership, your teaching, your training, and the other folks that I was able to meet through that process. But the other part of it is just from the website. Let's have a conversation. If you're frustrated with your business, if you got sleepless nights and your relationships in your family are getting strained, let's have a conversation.
Indeed.
Saying, that it'll only cost you 15 or 20 minutes, but it may be the most important 15 or 20 minutes of this year. Let's see what happens. We might be a lousy mix. Who knows? But if you don't have the conversation, you don't know.
And that comes, as you said, is your GPS,
That's
So
right. Yeah.
to know where you're going, you got to know where you are.
Well, yeah. I mean, you want to go, if you want to walk down the block in order to get a cup of coffee in one of these great cafes, if you don't know where you are, how are you going to get there?
Yeah. You gotta
Right?
know where you want to go. Yeah.
If somebody kidnapped you and dropped you off, 10 miles from where you are in a neighborhood you've never been in before, how do you get to that cafe? First, you got to figure out, where am I? You can smell the coffee at 10 miles, can you?
Pretty strong coffee. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful conversation. Let's wrap things up. We may do a part 2 in the future. To finish off, I'd like to ask a series of rapid fire questions about advices. Ready?
Okay, I will try.
Awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've received so far in your life?
to be able to hear the Lord say, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
Beautiful.
If I can hear that every day of my life, fantastic.
How do you hear it?
How do I do it? That's my prayer at the beginning of the day, and I remember it all the way through, that the Lord is encouraging me to do things well, be good, and be faithful as a servant.
Beautiful. What's the worst piece of advice you received so far?
Worst piece of advice. I don't know. I want to say something really witty, but I can't think of anything.
Okay. Imagine that you were blessed with a time machine. You can go back in time and sit face to face with the 18-year-old Phil. What's the number one piece of advice you would give to him, knowing all that you know now?
Take the time to sit down and have a long conversation with my dad. 3 years later, he passed away and never got a chance to say goodbye to him. And I would just love to be able to have that conversation. He was a very wise man, and just wish I could have had more time with him.
Indeed. Wow, that's powerful. You mentioned that you're going to be launching a podcast soon. Imagine that today you're interviewing the most special person in the world, and that is yourself. What's the first question you want to ask yourself? Don't think too much. First thing that comes to your mind.
Why do you do what you do?
And what's your answer?
Because I love the Lord, I love my wife, I love my family, and I want the very best for each one.
Beautiful. Love that. If someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
I don't have a website right now. At this moment, it's probably Facebook Messenger or LinkedIn chat that's there.
And they just
or you can email me at, it's still there, phil@soulimpact.ca.
And on social media, they just look for your name, Phil Routley.
Yep.
Okay, I'll put it in the show notes. Listen, Phil, absolutely beautiful conversation. Love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I salute you. You're truly with a heart. Keep shining your light. Keep blessing the world. Your presence, your impact, your word, your inspiration you provide to all those people. Stay safe. Stay blessed. God bless you, my friend, and talk to you very soon. See you actually tonight, tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Call for Jay.
Thank you, Payman. Right back at you too. Thanks so much.
For sure. Take care. Bye-bye.